170-196, 170-197, and resolution number 170-213. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the resolutions and bills.
Bill number 170195, an ordinance to adopt the capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2018 through 2023 inclusive. Bill number 170196, an ordinance to adopt the fiscal 2018 capital budget. Bill number 170197, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2018. Resolution number 170213, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2018 through 2022 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2017, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this council approved by the mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2018, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2018 through fiscal 2023. Today we will hear testimony from the following departments: the Controller's Office, Aviation, Sheriff, and City Commissioners. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is?
Alan Buckovitz.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
President Clark, members of City Council. I'm City Controller Alan Buckovitz, and I'm here today to testify on the Controller's Fiscal Year 2018 operating budget. I'm joined by my First Deputy City Controller Bill Rubin, Pre-Audit Deputy John Thomas, Post-Audit Deputy Christy Brady, as well as our Administrative Services Director Andrea Rose. The Mayor's proposed Fiscal Year 2018 operating budget for the City Controller's Office includes a general fund appropriation of $9.2 million. I would like to once again this year publicly thank all of our employees who continue to provide exceptional service to the citizens of Philadelphia. They are to be commended and congratulated for the work highlighted in my testimony. This year, the Post-Audit Unit audited all 42 city departments and agencies, as well as issued performance and/or special reports that included the PICA 5-year plan report, the Mayor's Fund for Philadelphia review of marathon reserves, Office of Human Resources tuition program. In addition, this unit completed the independent auditor's reports of the comprehensive annual financial report and the schedule of financial assistance for both the city and school district of Philadelphia. These reports provide recommendations to safeguard assets, enhance financial management, and strengthen internal accounting controls. I would also like to note that our office was recently recognized by the Association of Local Government Auditors with the Distinguished Knighton Award for Post-Audit's Performance Audit of the Philadelphia Fire Department's brownouts and rotation policies. This audit found the policies implemented by the Nutter administration jeopardized public safety by reducing the response rate for arriving on scene at a fire emergency. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, released their findings Monday detailing the horrific details of the incident that surrounded the tragic death of firefighter Joyce Craig. The NIOSH report confirmed our findings, and thankfully, the rotation and brownout policies were ended by the current administration. The pre-audit division reviewed more than $275 million in public works contract invoices over the last year. Through the pre-audit's tech unit's efforts to monitor invoices and to perform construction site visits, we saved taxpayers $1.3 million last year by identifying contractors who were billing too much for services and/or not performing the services listed on the invoice. Based on our experience with contract compliance auditing, the pre-audit staff participated in meetings with numerous stakeholders regarding the current state of diversity and inclusion in the construction industry. Those stakeholders included, but were not limited to, several city council members, such as Councilwoman Blackwell, Councilwoman Quinones Sanchez, Councilwoman Cindy Bass, and Councilman Derek Green, along with their staffs, representatives of the Mayor's administration, including the OEO Advisory Committee, representatives of the General Building Contractors Association, and representatives of the National Association of Minority Contractors. The Fraud and Special Investigations Division managed 104 cases last year, almost doubling the number of cases over the preceding year. In addition to reports of misconduct, time fraud, vehicle misuse, and residency investigations, they produced many reports, including the investigations into the city's mail center, an assessment of charter school managers, and a review of the city's performance for responding to pothole repairs. They also played a major role in the follow-up investigation of the Mayor's Fund for Philadelphia. This investigation identified hundreds of thousands of dollars in questionable spending and resulted in the current administration implementing some of our recommendations in order to improve accountability and to ensure that the money is used to fund programs that benefit all Philadelphians. The policy unit was busy this year with our Retirement Security Initiative, which included our report last May, Retirement Security in Philadelphia, an analysis of current conditions and paths to better outcomes. It analyzed the state of retirement security in Philadelphia and its impact on the fiscal and economic health of the city. I look forward to working with City Council, particularly Councilwoman Sherelle Parker, on this issue going forward. We continue to work on our Anchor Procurement Initiative. We have greatly accelerated and deepened the work of this initiative in partnership with the Commerce Department and our numerous partners among Philadelphia's eds and meds institutions. We particularly thank Councilman Al Taubenberger for his interest in and support for the indoor agriculture project. We continue to monitor tax revenues on a real-time basis through our monthly economic reports. In the very near future, we will be including disaggregated wage tax data in these reports, which will allow policymakers to understand job flow in our city by industry and geography. Finally, on the issue of criminal justice reform, a report is underway which will analyze the multifaceted costs of our cash bail system. We are working with the Public Defenders Association and others on this report, and we thank Councilman Curtis Jones and Kenyatta Johnson for their leadership on this issue. The Community Affairs Unit conducted financial wellness fairs in 5 different councilmanic districts, with many more being developed as we speak. I want to thank Council members Brian O'Neill, Bobby Heenan, Maria Quinones Sanchez, Mark Squilla, Janie Blackwell, Al Taubenberger, and Blondell Reynolds Brown, along with their staffs, for their participation and commitment to improving the financial wellness for many residents of all ages. In addition to working with city, state, and federal offices to provide community outreach, we conducted more than 50 senior fraud presentations over the last year. Our staff partnered again this year with Operation Hope, a nonprofit that focuses on financial empowerment to provide financial education to elementary and middle school students. We also completed the 3rd year of our Student Mentor Program by working with students from the Philadelphia Electrical and Technology School. We continue to work with community partners such as the Urban Affairs Coalition, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, and Councilman Alan Dom's office to establish a financial education course in several schools. We have been coordinating our efforts with the school district's administration as well as principals at high schools and elementary schools. I would also like to recognize those who work with our office on the pension board. This year I introduced the Employee Pension Income Conversion Plan that could reduce the unfunded liability by as much as $1 billion. It would allow city employees in the Legacy 67 plan to convert to Plan 87 in return for a one-time cash payment. We will be continuing our work with this proposal and anticipate having additional information to present to City Council. Along with conducting the annual audits for the city and school district and the many investigations that will arise throughout the next fiscal year, we will also be assuming the fiscal oversight role for the Mayor's Rebuild Initiative. The pre-audit unit will be actively engaged in monitoring the receipts and invoices before the funding is expended, and the post-audit unit will be auditing the financial reporting along with any performance-based reviews that might be required. I appreciate this opportunity to present my testimony, and I look forward to working with you in the coming year. My staff and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckowitz. I just have a couple of questions. On your audits of the Mayor's Rebuild Initiative, there has been money spent that was not a part of any revenues generated from the sugar tax or any general fund dollars, particularly money that was given by the William Penn Foundation and some nonprofits. Will your audit include those dollars being spent?
Yes.
Can you give me a little more on that?
Yeah,
there was, because there were different phases. There was an RFP put out to doing a.
Okay, Bill Rubin will address that.
There you go.
So, Mr. President, we're in the process of putting that together now. Christy Brady's working with the group over there in the rebuild department, and we're putting together exactly what will be met. William Penn has agreed to extend the timelines that they have put in place for certain pieces of that to be together, and so we're working with them to
So
achieve
that's
that
the
now.
early money to do the analysis on the,
There was approximately...
all of the facilities, and then there was additional dollars, and, you know, we didn't get a lot of the details because it happened prior to our involvement, meaning city council. It was not a part of a public process, essentially.
There was approximately $4.8 million that was set aside from William
Okay.
Penn to start and pay some of the salaries and the startup cost, and that cost hasn't all been transferred over. They've set it up so they would give them some, and then they would give them more as the timelines were met, and we're in the process of setting up a process to audit those funds.
What will your audit includes? Because will it just be the fiscal side of it, or will it be the process? Because the process was just so much different than it traditionally is. Normally when things come in, there's a public RFP put out, responses and a selection process, and we weren't a part of that. So will it include all aspects of the expenditures, the process, and the fiscal side of it?
That's what's being agreed to now between William Penn, the rebuild group, and our
you all.
department.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. You talked about this in your testimony, the pension buyouts. Kind of interested in that. And is this somewhat different than would be offered in the private sector? Because I know there's a number of buyouts in the private sector to help reduce long-term liabilities to pensions and
Right,
other retirement savings programs.
Well, this is not on the retirement savings side. This is on the unfunded liability side, and we're not governed by...
Well, I say that in terms of making the pension fund solvent.
Right,
So
right.
I'm saying...
So we're not covered by the restrictions of ERISA. We're just governed by state law. And the proposal that we've developed is that, as you know, $5 billion of the $6 billion unfunded liability is owed to employees who worked under the 67 plan.
Correct.
So the proposal, and we need to get buy-in from the unions and the workers before we can even go to the next step. But the concept is that if you would be willing to take the current benefits instead of the higher benefits that were earned by people under the 67 plan, the city would offer you a lump sum cash payment of half of the difference in value. And the pension board would be able to do so first we would need to determine if enough city workers would be interested, because this cannot be forced down their throat.
Correct.
Enough would be interested to make this something that could actually save money. And that's going to require some kind of survey, and because the city has a collective bargaining agreement and we're not going to try to go around the union leadership, we have to work.
That was tried before. That didn't work.
Yeah, we need to work with the union leaders, and the union leaders, I guess, are concerned. They're kind of in the middle of this problem because they don't want to give up anything that their members have earned. On the same token, they don't want to be seen as just giving anything away, but I think they are intrigued by the idea as well. So if we can figure out how to gauge how many city workers would be interested, then it would have to be negotiated with every single city employee. The pension board has the ability to tell by employee how much their total life expectancy is, how much their total benefits would be, and what that amount would be for each employee.
Right.
And if we could get to that step, then we'd have to come to council for enabling legislation, and then the proposal would be that agreements be sent to city workers, and if they signed, that they receive the money. The workers that did not agree to it would not be affected. So our concern would be that if nobody took it, or only the people who had terminal cancer or serious conditions took it, it wouldn't be a viable option because
Right.
we would get beat. But if, as I've noted, lottery winners are frequently enticed with the option of getting a lump sum of cash today as opposed to getting a payout over time. And even in the retirement area, we know a lot of people need
lump sums at the time their children go to college, or at the time that there's an illness in the family or something, so that there's many reasons that a city employee or a retiree may find it attractive to get a lump sum of cash now as opposed to waiting for it to be dribbled out over time. Really, the next stage that we're at is this idea about how do we gauge the level of interest by people in 67.
Have you determined in your analysis what percentage of those eligible individuals would have to buy into the program to make it a feasible scenario?
The actuaries haven't been able to guess that number, but I would think something in the 1/3, a third, 50% would have to be interested. Maybe the number would be a little bit lower. My personal experience, I've run into workers on the street who are like, where is this thing? I want to sign up tomorrow. Can I get it? We just need to work with the unions on a way to figure out. And we may not be able to do it with direct contact with the employees. We may have to do a poll or some other form of measuring their interest.
Okay. All right, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Dowd.
Good morning. Thank you, Council President. Good morning, Controller and
Good morning.
Staff. I have a few questions I wanted to ask you. Obviously, the two biggest issues for the city financially are the pension and the fund balance as far as where we are. And my question on the pension is, have you reviewed the administration's, I'm going to call it the road to 80%, the plan over the next 13 years, and the four legs of that stool, and given an opinion on that plan?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we've been working with at the pension board for the last few years. The real question is whether the assumed rate of return really can be relied upon for that period of time. So it's probably slightly optimistic. But as I noted in response to President Clark, the problem that we have with the pension fund is the legacy problem. So this is a problem that will eventually work its way through the system as the older retirees die off.
Right.
The issue has been how hard our city finance is going to be pressed in the interim, and how much trouble are we going to have dedicating enough money to police and to recreation and so on, while we're paying annual payments that are about $650 million a year now and are going to be going up to the $800 or $900 million range. But some of the pension crisis has been overhyped. There's never been a problem about whether the pension fund is going to be able to make good on its obligations or whether its solvency is at stake. All of that has been based on sensationalist and rigged kinds of assumptions, such as if the city suddenly stopped making its $650 million contribution every year for 5 years, then the pension fund wouldn't have any money. No kidding.
Well, let me ask you a question, though. There's four legs of the stool, as I understand it. One is the contributions we make, the MMO. That's
Right.
about roughly, from memory, $10 billion over the next 12 or 13 years. The second leg of the stool, from memory, is based on the returns of whatever it is, 7.5 or 7.7.
Right.
And that's about another $9 billion, okay? And the other two legs are anywhere from $1.5 to $2 billion in that range. So clearly the first two are the major tranches of whether this is going to be successful or not. So even if the rate wasn't 7.5% and the rate was 5%, okay, even if we're funded at 65%, have we done an analysis to show, even if the rate's not 7.5 but it's 5, where we come out?
I mean, the actuary reports that are done for the pension board have considered those options.
And if we have it at 5%, where would you think that percentage would come out in 12 or 13 years?
Yeah, I mean, that requires a specific question and
Well,
a
you can give me the
computer
answer.
run.
Yeah, if you could just give me the analysis. I'm just curious to see, and I agree with you, if the rate is 5%, if the rate's 6%, if the rate's 7%, maybe just share it with this body so we understand what the impact is of that level of return.
Okay.
On the fund balance, right now, we've been told, and we looked at charts and information of cities comparable to Philadelphia across the country, and our fund balance is like the second or third worst of those cities in that category. In your opinion, is it important to have a fund balance that's between 6 and 8%, which is the recommended guideline?
Sure, if it's possible, but there are so many pressures in Philadelphia, so many unmet needs, so many unrepaired potholes and rec centers and everything that it's very difficult to achieve as a practical matter. Council's always facing that dilemma of how do we put money in a bank account while we tell people that we're not going to be able to fix the potholes for 5 years. But I can. This office has flagged for the last 2 or 3 years this impending problem around fiscal year 2019, and if God forbid there is a recession in the meantime or anything goes wrong, there will be tremendous pressure on the council for tax increases that have not been anticipated in the plans.
But, isn't it, to a degree, it's the concept of save before you spend, which not everyone does that in their own personal lives, but that's kind of the concept of what we need to do in government in some ways.
But it's exactly how we got into hot water and pensions. Because as you know, during the 80s and 90s, we made a ton of money in the pension fund. And what happens when you're, before Rendell left and he borrowed that $1 billion to invest in the stock market, which was lost within 3 years, we were at 76% funded. So what happens when you're rich? What happens is that there's pressure to do cost of living increases and to share the wealth. And in fact, I remember being in the middle of, in Harrisburg, there was a lot of feeling that we had a great run during the 80s, and we need to share this, and it will go on forever. If the economic times are good, just like they were before the Depression, when the things are good, people believe it will always be rich. And when things are bad, people think it will never get better again. So although in an academic sense, people can look at it and say, over 50 years, we know how it works. The people that are living in the real world are being engulfed by those emotions. And there are always these competing legitimate demands. The cost of living increases needed to be given because people who've been retired for 20 or 30 years, people who were getting $80 a month pensions couldn't live on that anymore. So you put on your green eye shades and you say you should have been able to tighten your belt and be able to live with that, but the people who are trying to buy food and pay their car insurance, they can't wait for that. So you're dealing with these abstract principles, and I'd say Philadelphia is in better shape. Look, Governor Christie preached this stuff all this time, and he turned out to be a hypocrite because he did a year or two where he didn't put any money in the pension fund. Philadelphia has never done that. Philadelphia has a better record than the state of Pennsylvania, the state of New Jersey. Every year we put money away, and frankly, since at least the Nutter administration, for all 8 years, they put in more money than the law required. So understanding, and Rob DeBoe deserves a lot of credit for that because it's almost the biblical thing, like saving the wheat in the rich years so that when the famine comes, you'll have it. I think the city's been doing, it's a question within the margins. We've been putting in like an extra $20 million a year. Something happens like the expiration of the extra 1% sales tax, and then there's an issue. President Clark recommended that be put into the pension fund. And that was in competition with the needs of the school district.
So let me just ask one quick question. Is your office in favor of the administration's plan or not?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. And Controller, it was good to hear you have this conversation about the fund balance, because there's different philosophies and different ways that people view the fund, and understanding that, yes, right, would it be best if it was 6 to 8% in savings? But the reality is, we are a large municipality, one of the largest in the country. We service 1.5 people on a daily basis, which is costly. And one thing I have learned in my short time here in council is every good idea has a cost to it. So when we're out here trying to make sure that our workers in uniform and non-uniform get the fairest contract that they deserve, that we continue to look at ways to be more efficient, all right, ways to be cost effective and get our best value on our products. And some of our products and a lot of our products are services and public services, which I think we need to continue to stay on top of. And that's which is great about this budget process that we have here.
I appreciate that, and we have recently talked to the credit rating agencies because remember during the Nutter administration they had something like a $200 million plus surplus, and then Mayor Kenny came in and negotiated the contracts, and the surplus was sharply reduced, and the rating agencies took a slap at us about that, and we got into really the weeds, the detail with them, and pointed out that $200 million surplus was a phony all those years because it was really money that was being reserved for union contracts that wasn't being given to workers. And Mayor Kenny honestly recognized the need to pay the workers. The change between what it looked like before and what now was really not a change, and it was unfair to take a slap at the city in the credit rating for that, and that in fact the city has been increasingly disciplined in its approach to dealing, so that these were kinds of statistical anomalies because of the way liabilities were being recognized before and after. And what has actually been, in my view, a more disciplined city approach to budgeting was being penalized because of the way it looked on paper. And I think we've made progress in getting them to see that.
Right, and it's different administration's philosophy on their approach.
Right.
All right, that turns, as a lot of things, can turn political. And, that really doesn't send a good message when, we as a city and we as a legislative body, do hold, the administration accountable, do hold the departments accountable
Right.
in their actuaries and their reporting, especially when it comes to finances. I wanted to touch on a little bit more what the council president had started the conversation with the buyouts for the pension, and there's some 31,000 that are eligible that that you've been talking about, and you had mentioned about a survey. Is that a survey that has taken place?
No,
with city
because
employees,
we've got to try to solve this problem that the union presidents will face. Because on the one hand, we don't want to try to go behind their back. On the other hand, I don't want to put them in an impossible position where by approving our survey language, it looks like they've already okayed something that some of their members fiercely believe that they should resist. So it's a conundrum. The workers should only be communicated with through the union leadership, and the union leadership should retain the power to form an opinion about this proposal later on. But we need to get their cooperation in the meantime so we can even test whether it's a viable option. And that's what we're struggling with right now. How do we formulate language for a survey that doesn't take away the union leadership's leverage to be able to form an opinion later on how they feel about this?
And you don't necessarily, you certainly don't want to do that. Has there been an actuarial report? Or is there, is an actuarial, are they taking a look at this model by bellwethering and taking samples of, our pensioners or our future pensioners?
Yes, and I think maybe what we need is an underwriter more than an actuary, because if we can't do a survey of our own employees, then we may have to look at examples in private industry where something like this has happened and see at what percentage participation rate and so on it becomes a profitable plan. But I don't think that we've seen any other plans that look quite like this. In the private sector, they're generally 100% buyouts. So the idea that this would be a part payment buyout changes a lot of things, and there's really no precedent for that. But on the other hand, the stuff that we're interested in is how many people that would be opting in would have serious health problems, and how many of them would have a life expectancy that varied from what it would be if things were left untouched. And we might be able to find analogs for that in the private sector.
Right, and predicting people's intentions are almost, a non-factor. I mean, you can't factor in that. I mean, we can only factor in what the financial realities are of the pension, the existing pension fund, and, what would happen if, people chose to get out, because, you never can predict people's intentions, whether they feel like they're going to, retire at a certain age, something they trigger in their life,
Right.
At a certain time, and say, hey, you know what, I was going to stay till I'm 62. I'm going to get out at 59. I'm going to rent an RV and going to go to the Grand Canyon. So you just never, you can never quantify or put a number into somebody's future intentions, because you don't know what that is.
Right.
Last for my line of questions here in this round is one of the findings that, and I've been in contact with your office over past several years with, is the Anchor Procurement Initiative, all right, which I think is exciting. And the report promoted or recommended a two-way communication between purchasers and the manufacturers of goods in the city. The Office of Industry and Manufacturing is currently working on a database for our manufacturers. What sort of information should they include, in your opinion, or can we work on finding what kind of information that would be helpful to the institutions in order to work towards local procurement?
Well, what we're trying to do is develop an inventory from the institutions and the hospitals about the products that they purchase, and then we've got to figure out what the components of those products are, and then match them with either current Philadelphia producers or companies that can be induced to do production in Philadelphia. So whether it's a question of surgical instruments or the kind of carts that are used in hospitals, or people say like the little wheels on the carts, there may be a tremendous market for somebody to manufacture those wheels in Philadelphia if the local hospitals will agree that they will buy that from the local producer. So when you think of the large number of products that they use, then there's the next step of breaking it down into all the subparts of what that involves.
I mean, the goods could be endless, from paper products to,
Yes.
to furniture. Are there policies that we could put in place to further incentivize large-scale purchases from the institutions?
Well, we
here
really
locally
haven't gotten
with
we
the
haven't
local
gotten to
supplier
that
network?
we haven't gotten to that point yet. I think that we're allowed to go to a certain extent in encouraging local procurement, but we got to pay attention to the Commerce Clause. We can't shut people out from other states and areas from bidding on our work because of federal constitutional requirements. But we can give extra points to local procurement and
We certainly can.
yes.
We certainly can. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Controller, and good morning, and to your staff, thank you for what you do.
Morning.
Particularly in the area of justice reform, we're treading on new waters. We're trying to figure out a restorative justice model that keeps the citizens safe but doesn't overburden. I tell people in Harrisburg that there are two types of folk when it comes to justice: those who want to save souls and those who want to save money. And in justice reform, you can actually accomplish both. You actually can. So the question becomes, how do we figure out how much doing good costs? And that's where we rely on you. 24% or so of our budget is policing, courts, and prisons. If we really want to save money, like Councilman Dom is talking about, like you have spoken about, this is the area in which we have to kind of focus some of our pen sharpening and using our common sense in our approach. But what we've seen, in prisons testified yesterday, that we've seen incremental change. We went from approximately 9,000 inmates down to 6,500, but we have not seen true savings yet. We haven't hit critical mass where we can. And so that's one aspect. The second, which we need your help on, is creating an accurate accounting system that draws, if we try to do social services, where does that social worker or probation officer come from, and appropriately debiting or accrediting that resource, that salary, that time to a model that says, here's what you've saved, here's what you've spent, and here's how much good you did. Those things, I don't think we've seen a model for. But if we're going to, and if this body is going to go in the direction of day reporting centers or other things, we actually have to have an accounting system that takes into account everyone's rock soup contribution. And with that,
Yeah, it's a struggle to really put together a model like that. There's this concept in the investment world of kind of selling social credits. So the idea is that if you had a program for restorative justice that proved that the utilization of the prisons would go down by 5% or something, and if that's $10 million, that you should be able to sell bonds for that and pay for them out of the lower expenditure, or actually get the private investor to take the risk. They've tried that in Massachusetts, but nobody's really had the courage of their convictions on it because they've been amounts like $200,000. Nobody really believes enough, and I guess the history of government budgeting is it's always a moving target. So you think you're going to save money between now and 5 years. By the time you get to 5 years from now, that money's been spent on something else, and the investors are like, do we really want to buy a bond like that on the basis that the money we saved on prison utilization is now not being used for a newly, maybe there's a public health crisis or something else that pops up and the money's not there. The second is an initiative that I understand took place in the 24th Police District back in the early part of this century, where they targeted, I think it was the 100 kids who were most likely to be perpetrators or victims of homicide, and they would invest intensive social work and other supportive services behind them, and they had an expectation that I think 7% of them would either be perpetrators or victims within 5 years, and they got a figure that was much lower than that. But that program was abandoned because it was so expensive. So we can try to see if we can go back and see if there's any records that remain for that program.
so if we look at programs like Councilman Johnson's Focus Deterrent, not that he is the owner or creator of the program, but it is a model that has existed in his district. We know, similar to what you said, if 100 kids are estimated to be high risk, and if indeed 7% of them is the average that wind up going into the system and we get it down to 5%, there's a mathematical equation that we can attribute to. Councilman Dom questioned the prison department yesterday, trying to get his head around some of those figures, and it is difficult at best to quantify what those savings and even cost are. So if you can dedicate some time, staff time, to creating those models, I think we can get an accurate sense, because members in this body want to do progressive things, but what we want to do is monitor what good costs. And so if a day reporting center, we know how much a homicide trial on average costs. We know how much trials actually cost that are less time and duration. We have to create averages and models that say, if Bill Greenlee, I want the chairman's same time clock, young man. You walked away, and I saw what you did. So, no, I'm gonna stop. But if we could create those kinds of things, we can then measure what we do. And I always say, in my own lingo, if it ain't measured, it ain't managed. And if we're going to bring things to scale, we have to know what the change is. So if you can dedicate some
Right,
time.
and we already have Tommy St. Hill Jr. and Isaiah Thomas in our office working on that issue.
Fine young men, fine
Yep.
young men. In spite of Tommy's father.
Well, there was an issue at one time. I think I got aggravated with him and took Saint out of his name. It was just Tom Hill and Tommy St. Hill. But since then, he's re-earned Saint.
See, proof positive that if we invest in young people, they
Yeah.
can rise above their circumstances.
I think he's entitled to rebuttal time.
So those are things that I'm sure, if we're talking about focused deterrent, if we want to bring that to other districts, other areas, we better measure what we're talking about, because every time Councilman Johnson pushes that forward, people start to, talk about the cost, but the cost of prevention, the savings that comes with it, hasn't been measured in a real and substantial.
No, that's a valuable idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman, I appreciate us sharing our equal time distribution here in the City Council.
So he took a walk. I watched him walk away.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Controller, I wanted to say thank you very much for your comments on the record relative to the fiscal stewardship of the pension fund, particularly that we have Philadelphia has fared much better than some folks have given us credit for,
Right.
particularly as it relates to making that MMO payment, going above and beyond the call of duty adjustments, so that, the slow but sure exit from hedge fund investments. And I just don't think Fran and Rob and quite frankly the entire board gets the credit that it deserves for the work that it has done. So I appreciate you putting that on the record. My comment is just relative to the buyout or the cash buyout and or, I want to say it correctly, the employee pension income conversion plan. I wanted to ask that if it's any sort of actuarial data or any further research, that we would also find out how many of those employees who would potentially be eligible, particularly if we're talking about the $5 billion of unfunded liability associated with Plan 67 and the legacy cost. So I appreciate you putting that on the record, too. But how many of them are homeowners in the city of Philadelphia? And the reason why that's extremely important to me is that obviously we've all seen Pew's recent data. We know that Philadelphia boasts a high level of home ownership, particularly in middle neighborhoods, like the 9th. They are targeted because it's even much higher than the city. I can think of 2 to 3 areas, right off the top of my head, where the home ownership rate is like 73 to 75%. But these groups are targeted with I'll buy your house for cash, get the reverse mortgage. So with that in mind, I would be interested in knowing how many folks who are receiving those benefits in the legacy Plan 67 category are homeowners in the city of Philadelphia, because they're that assured income. Would it in any way, shape, or form impact their ability to maintain those properties, particularly with neighborhood preservation and access to disposable income being a major driving force that is not allowing Councilman Jones people to repair those driveways, those retaining walls, Councilwoman Blackwell, those steps. So anything that we could do, if you get that data, control it, please share it with us. That would be extremely helpful.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that, but that's, we'll talk to our policy unit about
Thanks
how
a
that can
lot.
be accomplished.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Controller, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for your testimony. Some of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked by other council members, but I wanted to touch base on the work you've been doing with the Inner City Capital Connections Program. As you know, there's a program that since 2005 has helped create over 12,000 jobs and about $1.4 billion in capital. Is in a number of cities around the country, notably Boston, Chicago, Dallas, LA, Memphis, Milwaukee, Tampa, DC, and also here in Philadelphia. It's been in operation for the past 3 years. I want you to kind of give your perspectives on this program and some of the benefits of the program and how we as a city can invest more in this program to have a greater return to grow more businesses in the city of Philadelphia to address poverty.
Right. The councilman's referring to a national program that is centered in a number of cities in which 100 or 150 local entrepreneurs who have businesses that are maybe generating $1 to $3 million in annual revenues may be perched on the outskirts of maybe growing to very large size. And the question is connecting them with capital resources and with training so that they're able to take advantage of it. And they've had some very dramatic success stories. One construction company in Philadelphia was a graduate of that program and is now in the tens of millions of dollars in revenue. They had an interesting story about somebody who was a street vendor of hair gel products that was bought out, I think, by something like $900 million by a national company. And they accept nominations, recruitment from chambers of commerce, perhaps council people and so on, and they run this, it's either a 1 or 2 day seminar. They did it in Philadelphia last year, and it was a little bit of an embarrassment because Philadelphia doesn't have the same kind of private philanthropic record that these other cities have. What they need to raise is $100,000, $125,000 to pay for the overhead of this. And therefore, there's been a different look at Philadelphia, and the question is whether the council could appropriate that overhead, because even we did have a lunch with some of the major business leaders in town, and people came to the lunch, and people did make nominations of small businessmen they thought would be beneficiaries, but they were like, contribute $10,000? You know, there's a history in Philadelphia, I guess, that people only contribute when there's a big local name that asks. Why would they contribute just to an idea? And this group is, I guess, headquartered in Massachusetts. So it would really be helpful. In the grand scheme of things, it's a very manageable figure, but the potential and the criteria is that these be inner city businesses, that they geographically be within high poverty census areas, and that people actually hit a relatively high bar for eligibility into this. But this is an admission to connections and to mentorship with very high credit-worthy credit agencies in New York. So we think it would be a real boost to the entrepreneurial class in Philadelphia if we could get the council, the mayor and the council on board for something like $150,000 appropriation.
Yeah, the business you referenced, I believe that's Perriman Construction, which I think many people in this room are familiar with. Angelo Perriman is the president and CEO of that company, and he is a graduate of this program. I know you've done a lot of work, and I know Councilman Heenan talked about the Anchor Procurement Initiative. How would this initiative help in reference to your work regarding Anchor Procurement?
Well, it helps us. Like, one thing that's going to be happening because of Dr. Hornstein's work on Anchor Procurement is the creation of a minority-owned medical laundry in Philadelphia, where there's been no medical laundry for 20 years, and all the hospitals have signed up and agreed they're going to send work over there. So what it will do is it will create a bench of people here who are capable of filling the needs of these local hospitals and educational institutions, and now have the... One of the biggest problems we've had in minority contracting, period, has been that no matter how expert they are doing the work, they can't get their hands on the money and the capital. And if we, and you know from your own past experience, that's a major issue. So if we can unlock access to capital in New York, that's going to fill one of the major impediments to the growth of minority business in Philadelphia.
Just one last question. I know with the ICCC program in other cities, they've worked with their chambers of commerce. Are you aware if there's been any outreach to the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce playing a role or helping to raise some dollars for this program?
There probably hasn't been because we're kind of like the local guides on that, and I think in the time frame that we're involved in, we have a lot more confidence in council's interest in this issue and ability to move things forward than we would. We've tried the private sources, and we're in better shape if we come to council, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Controller.
Good morning.
With the pending bills like Senate Bill 10 and other bills which have threatened to defund the city over the sanctuary city status, some estimates, according to articles I've written by the sponsors, is it could be upwards of $638 million. Have you, in some sense, calculated what the city could or should do should these bills pass? What would be the action, or what steps should we take as a city to deal with potential defunding of the city?
Well, I think that what the city would do would be very vigorously fight any such legislation in court. It's about $340 million in federal money at risk and about $600 million in state money. The city budget's $4.4 billion. There's no way that the city could make any kind of reasonable contingency plan to replace $1 billion worth of lost revenue. But there is a strong constitutional argument that the federal government can't impose these kinds of extra duties on the state and local governments, and there are strong opinions that that would be defeated in court, so that, and as was clear in the recent Obamacare, people may be making all sorts of threats, but their capacity to get that legislation through the Congress is really very questionable. So, other than to say that it would be a disaster if something like that happened, the take on an annual basis from the real estate tax is $1 billion. So if you lost $1 billion, everybody's real estate taxes would have to double. That's an easy way of looking at it. The police department is about $600 million. I think it's the biggest department. So I guess you could close down the police department. I don't know what to say other than that. I mean, it would be absurd for the city to absorb $1 billion punitive cut in funds that it would be self-defeating. What would be the point of defunding the police department because they're concerned that some aliens might commit crimes and so you're not going to have any police? Really? Does that make any sense? It doesn't.
Yeah, I think you may be referring to possibly the decision by Justice Anton Scalia, in which the Supreme Court's delineated that there are state, local versus federal positions, and the federal government cannot just assign to local government duties held and done by federal authorities. And yet, these bills to defund the city are moving forward. They have passed various levels of our state legislature. They seem imminent, although they may not be constitutional. And while we should fight them in court, and I do think we have very strong grounds to prevail, the problem that I look at is there seems to be a political will somewhere to harm our city broadly, and if that moves forward, we have, it appears, no preparation for dealing with this overwhelmingly bad, catastrophic situation. Is there some kind of steps that we can take or that you think we should take to buffer that while we fight this?
Well, I think as Chris Matthews noted, the Republicans in Congress voted to repeal Obamacare about 100 times when they didn't have the power to do it. And as soon as they did have the power to do it, they didn't do it. So we're familiar with the legislative tactic of putting bills in because you can get a positive press release or a press hit or popularity with a constituency group, and it's very different than when you have the responsibility in your hand that your bill's going to go through and you're going to be responsible for the damage. That's a very sobering impact. I don't think it would be helpful to put together a doomsday scenario about how are we going to try to deal with losing on the sanctuary city issues. I think that would precipitate, if something like that, God forbid, happened, there would be a crisis that would bring together federal, state, and city leaders, pretty much like what happened when Philadelphia was on the verge of bankruptcy in the 90s, or like what happened during New York's near bankruptcy in 75, and you can't rehearse for that. You can't have a contingency plan for it because people will be accepting of all sorts of solutions that they would never consider unless they were in the middle of the flood or the disaster or whatever. So you know the amount of money that needs to be replaced, you know what everything costs, and I think if something like that happened, there would be a lot of scampering and crisis management. And, you know, in New York, they stopped the free college tuition and they cut worker salaries. And what would be the point of putting out actually, you would be giving aid and comfort to the people that are against the city. So you want to put out a report saying that the city workers would have to either be cut in half or they'd have to have their salary cut in half. And then you're going to have the people who are anti-Philadelphia saying, well, what's bad about that? Maybe that's why we should do it. I don't think it's useful to do a contingency plan.
I don't disagree with you. I just wanted your opinion. I know my time is up. I will make this statement that it does not seem to fully penetrate our public how damaging such a defunding would, how much damage it would do, number one. Number two, it is a bipartisan. Democrats support defunding Philadelphia. And so while it will create a lot of damage for our cities, surrounding counties, and ultimately our entire metropolitan region, if not our state, the same people who will pass this bill to defund us will then scamper hurriedly to try to fix the damage, which will just be even more expensive and problematic once you have harmed the city in that fashion.
Well, what do you think would happen if that actually hit and the city announced to the suburbs that we're disbanding the Philadelphia Police Department? You don't think that there would be a crisis in the suburbs about what are we going to do about this? Are they going to hire all the Philadelphia police to create a cordon around the city? Or are they going to go to Harrisburg and say, we got to have an emergency package to make sure that they're policing the streets of Philadelphia so that they don't have to put all that attention into the streets of Lower Merion because it's spilling over? That's why you really can't, it's an artificial thing when it's theoretical. If something like that, at one time when the Philadelphia School District was bankrupt, we kind of floated the idea that if we didn't get fair funding, maybe we would just close the Philadelphia schools and petition to have the Philadelphia students recruited into all the adjoining school districts so that it would be a state responsibility and the responsibility of taxpayers in this area, and there just wouldn't be a Philadelphia school district. Everybody'd be in the Lower Merion School District. And as soon as those words would leave my mouth, people would say, well, then the problem will be over. The problem would be over. So I think Rahm Emanuel said you should never waste a good crisis. Sometimes when these crises pop up and they haven't thought them through, we need to be adept enough to think them through a little faster than they can. Mayor Street was one of the best at this, right? When things looked bad for the city or for school funding, he always found a way that he came out of the deal with Philadelphia further ahead than it was before that problem. So I'll give you a perfect example. Bill Rubin worked on the Pension Reamortization Act in 2009. We had to get the law changed in Harrisburg to give us a breathing space when the stock market collapsed, so we didn't have to do a $125 million tax increase. And the Republicans in the legislature thought this was the time they were going to go after the unions, and they were going to scalp them. And included in with the unions was punitive stuff that they did to police officers. They said they couldn't retire now until 55 instead of 40, and it didn't occur to them that they all got police officers in their territory, and the police have a very strong unions. And the same people that were pushing the legislation, when they came back into session a day later, they pulled it off the table because it was like, oh my God, they're after us now. We were after sanitation workers. We didn't mean to go after police officers. Those people vote in our area, and they have popularity with some of the groups that don't like city workers, but they like police. And they simply hadn't thought it through. So I think that's the same thing that's going on with this punitive legislation. It may be an easy applause line, but if they ever really try to do it, they'll find out that the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, is connected to the knee bone, and there's going to be a lot of shared pain.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. The chair will recognize Councilwoman Blackwell.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And I should be the last, right? Other than
Well, maybe.
Councilman Dom. And Councilman Dom has too much money for us to interrupt.
I second that motion.
But we like him.
Confiscatory taxes.
Let me say that in your statement, you talked about the 1.3 million that you saved from contractors who were not doing what they were supposed to do.
Right.
Now, do the organizations you mentioned, like Minority Business Enterprise Council, who has a list of who they are? And could we
Okay, John, you'll
get
take
them,
this.
or do we need to talk to those agencies to try to get them? Thanks. So we're aware of who these people are when we do projects in our areas.
You have to identify yourself first.
Good morning. I'm John Thomas, Periodic Deputy
Pull
Controller.
your mic up, John.
Good morning, John Thomas, Periodic Deputy Controller. Councilwoman, are you asking the list of the companies that we
That
identify?
do wrong, is that private, or can we? No, you talk about saving the city 1.3 million.
We can provide the council with a list of those companies that.
Thank you. Thank
yes.
you very much. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few more questions I wanted to ask, especially since you seconded that nomination. Number one, I'm trying to understand, in your testimony, you mentioned the controller's budget is 9.2 million, but there's no detail of that budget. Is that available?
Yeah, the detail comes from the budget office, but we can submit it.
Okay. You can get us a copy of that. A ballpark, maybe you can tell me this question, because I ask everybody the same question. Proposed Class 100 salary, any idea of the salary for this year of the 9.2?
How much of our budget is Class 100 for the coming year? So this is Andrew. You're gonna.
Let me get the information first. Good morning, I'm Andrea Rose, Administrative Services Director of the City Controller's Office, and for fiscal 18, for salaries, Class 100 will be $8,426,765.
Okay, and then does that include the fringe benefits?
Yes,
And what percentage of, so your salaries and fringe is all included in that number?
yes.
What is
No.
the,
Is it not?
No, that's not.
Oh, no, okay, no,
it does not include fringe benefits?
no, I'm sorry.
Roughly, what's your percentage of fringe benefits that you pay for every dollar of salary? When you pay somebody $50,000 a year, what's the percentage of fringe benefits?
Yeah, I think the benefits are included in the finance department's line item, right? And they're,
Included.
yeah, so,
We
so
don't have a
we,
line
we
item.
don't know what that is. It's a
Okay.
cumulative figure. It's a huge number under finance. It's like $800 or $900 million, and it includes all the benefits for all city employees and all departments.
So you're probably, are you as the same as the city in general, basically?
Yeah.
So that would be roughly, in this last budget, 87%. And this leads to my next question. I'm trying to understand, I heard different testimony of different departments. Our fringe benefits, or have you ever done an analysis on why fringe benefits for the city is 87%, the city overhead is 37%, as was presented to us in the L&I bill, which means that for every, I'm going to say this 50,000 times till we get it right, for every $50,000 of salary, we pay another $62,000 in benefits and overhead of the city, 112 grand. For every 100,000 of salary, we pay another 124,000. We pay 224. In the private sector, the numbers are 31 to 40%. Can we do an audit and figure out how to lower those numbers dramatically?
Yeah, we can do an analysis. Our feeling is we could probably do it from available data. It probably doesn't
Yeah.
require an audit.
That'd be great. I would love to see that. Here's the second question. I want to follow up with Councilman Jones about the prisons yesterday. We had them testifying. I went home last night after being here all day, and I was racking my brain out as to, I can't understand how this is working. I can't understand how we have 8,200 prisoners and a budget with benefits of 310 to 320 million. We reduce the inventory, we're going to reduce the inventory by 2,500, 34%, and yet our expenses are going up. The per cost was testified yesterday is $50,000 per prisoner, and if 2,400 or 2,500 prisoners are being reduced, I'm not saying we're going to save 125 million, but I will say this, if they came to us and said we're arresting another 2,500 people, they definitely would be there saying we need another 125 million to take care of them. But why isn't there any kind of savings on the other side, and can we audit that and see what's going on?
Well, I mean, my first impression would be is a similar dynamic in the schools. When you reduce the student population in a school, you have such an overwhelming number of fixed costs. If you got to the point where you could close an entire prison, you would have a windfall. But if you reduce the prison population by 25%, you still have the heating bill, you still have all the maintenance costs, you still have ratios of correction officers to prisoners, you still have...
Except you're going to cut down on food, you can cut down on health care. They said yesterday their health care package was negotiated as a bulk contract. Why can't we go back to the supplier and say, we're going to have 2,500 less people of the 8,200. It's not fair that we keep paying for 82 when we have 2,500 less.
Yeah, we'll look into it. Okay.
I understand all that, and we have 6 prisons. And I heard yesterday, I think it was Councilman Jones who asked this question also, of the different levels of prisoners. And if there's 4 different levels of prisoners, and our prison population's reducing by 34%, maybe we only need 5 prisons and not 6 prisons, and maybe there's a way to accommodate it and cut the overhead. I just don't think we look at it as if it's our money. I think we just look at these things and say, okay, it's okay, and they're coming in for more money as their numbers are going down.
Okay.
So I'd like you to look into that if you could.
Okay.
Overall question for you, so I don't know, how many employees roughly are in your office?
Was it 132?
As of today, we can still-
136.
And if I were to ask you in the last year, 2016, or fiscal year, whatever, what would you say? I know that in your testimony you talked about 1.3 million you found in fraud, I think it was, right, in audits that were done?
Right.
But overall, you've done a lot more reports that have shown a lot more potential savings across the board. Could you give me an idea, give this body an idea of, in general, A, how much money you've saved, and 2, in the reports you've generated, how much is the potential savings if we would adopt them?
Well, I know the potential savings is up around $800 million, and I know the largest figure there was the $25 million a year that we believe is recoverable on rescue squad services if the city does a good job of collecting from third-party insurers. Because of the high utilization rate of the rescue squads, people were not collecting the right Social Security numbers. The data, everybody who has a rescue squad ride either has insurance or medical assistance. So the city should be fully reimbursed for those costs. So the fact that there's somewhere between $25 and $50 million a year that is uncollected is just pure negligence.
So when you do these reports, you give them to who?
Well, they're sent to the mayor and to the department and to all the council members.
And so what happens after that?
When we go back into the department for the next audit, we do a checklist to see what progress they've made on our prior recommendations.
But who in the administration do you actually sit down to say, look, here's the report, here's the savings, how do we implement it?
Well, I mean, the mayor, during the Nutter administration, there was tremendous resistance, for example, in that rescue squad report. We did that, I think, in 2008, and we reported this $25 million potential for savings, and the mayor begrudgingly put in $1 million in savings in his budget. And we actually went out and we brought in private vendors who were accomplishing much better reimbursement rates and much lower cost, and we did a presentation, and the representative that came in there from the mayor's office was like swept off his feet, and he said, "That's great, how do we get to do something like that?" And I said, "Your office needs to put out an RFP and try to get a vendor who will do that." And finally, in the 7th year, the 8th year, they said, "You know what? We're going to save we're going to make $25 million a year out of this," which we said 5 years earlier. So all I can say is that that is a product of the balance of powers and the push and shove between the personalities, between the mayor, controller, and the council members. Perhaps if you were here at that time, they would have expedited. They did change the vendor who was managing collections on that contract. The other savings are bits and pieces here and there, and I would say that that there seems to be more receptivity in the last year or two towards let's just look for good ideas rather than be concerned about where did they come from or who gets credit for it, or if we didn't think of it, we're not interested in it. But it's a negotiating process. Obviously, for us to be the auditor, we're prohibited from having any management responsibility. The best we can do is look at it, say, here's a problem, and use the leverage of media attention and of the interest of council to try to convince the administration that if we repeatedly come back on a problem and they ignored it, there's going to be something to pay. And I would say the early indications have been positive on that.
I mean, here's my point on the last question. I'm over my time. If we were in the private business world, you came to us in a business with recommendations to save $800 million, people who did not implement those recommendations would have to have the answers as to why they didn't implement them, and I want to see the reasons why. In other words, I'd like to see a panel of you and the people who are supposed to implement them. Why are these not being implemented? Either they're not going to work or we're not doing our job. But when you have $800 million and we're dealing with taxpayers' money, I'd like to know why that's not being implemented.
I agree with you. I've often wondered why there isn't more impetus to do that in Philadelphia, and it seems to be kind of the Philadelphia way, that if we've always done it this way. Look, take the rescue squads again. We had a lot of expertise on that. 1/3 to 40% of the time, they don't get there in time to save somebody's life if they're having a heart attack. And the reason is the fire department itself said that maybe 90% of the calls are not emergencies. They're taxi service. So anybody who was interested in the operational efficiency of that process would say, if we went back to shared ride where we were paying for free taxis, or we had to give them a $40 or a $6 taxi ride, that would be better than an $1,100 ride in a rescue squad where you're taking a vehicle out of service that somebody might need because they're in a life and death situation. And I would ask the fire commissioner at the time, why aren't we doing that? And the answer was, number one, we always did it this way. And secondly, that there would be an exercise of discretion. And we did that once in 1987, and somebody didn't get a rescue squad and they died, so the city got sued. So if we make it automatic that we just dispatch rescue squads one after the other, maybe we won't get sued. Maybe we will get sued because the next guy in line died. But that seems to be an inbred cultural attitude in Philadelphia government, that the CYA and the response to things is if we do things the way we always did them, we're not going to get criticized or get into trouble.
No, I don't agree with that, but hopefully we'll change. But thank you for your testimony.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. We're getting late in the hour. My good friend and colleague, Councilman O, talked about something, not doomsday preparation, but fiscal forward-thinking Plan Bs, I like to call them. Where I might agree with him is not so much in, what happens if North Korea does this, that, or the other, but some trends that we're seeing that, irrespective of party, Democrat or Republican, are coming. And one such area is CDBG funding. We know that at the height of the chairmanship of Councilwoman Blackwell, I think we were at $83 million this city got every year to do affordable housing, to do low-income housing. Last year, under a Democratic administration, we got 39 million. So that's, I went to public school, but that's half, right? Yeah. And we can anticipate with the appointment of Ben Carson that it isn't going to get any better. And so we need your help in establishing Plan Bs for that, in the way of Council President put together a model he identified 3,000 vacant or city-owned properties, broke them down by district. I think in my district we had like 300. And then we started the conversation of I think it's called receivership, or some kind of process by which a tax delinquent property would be put in a responsible realtor or developer or CDC's hand, brought up the code, rented out, and that if the owner went back to reclaim it, they would have to pay the arrearages and whatever documentable improvements put in their property. If we know the number of housing units for affordable housing are going to go down, if we know price points in neighborhoods are going up and they're squeezing that market out, we have to do something different because help isn't coming, over the mountain to save us. So if we could look at those kinds of things that would not be a violation of the law or a violation of I'm more than willing to break with Philly tradition to do something different. But what we always want to do is be fiscally sound and responsible when we do it.
All right, it's a valid point. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a question you've answered already. You were at a hearing. It's about cigarettes and cigarette tax. I just want to kind of lay out my concern, not for you, you know the concern. Our city had to fund the schools. The state didn't give us the money. They gave us the authority to tax ourselves more for cigarettes, so we tied cigarettes to school funding. Then, recently, there's been some proclamations by our city agency that they are reducing the number of cigarette licenses by like 1,700, and it affects school funding. At the same time, then I'm told that doesn't matter because there's a certain amount of money that the school is going to receive, in which case I wonder, why do we even have a cigarette tax then? What is your opinion about all this? I just see it as very problematic.
What's my opinion about what part of it?
If we, in fact, reduce or eliminate 1,700 cigarette licenses, and does it matter?
I mean, I believe that maintenance of revenue deal in Harrisburg is predicated on good faith on our part. If we try to collect the cigarette taxes and we run short on on what our goal is, we're going to be held harmless up to a certain amount. But that doesn't give us license to revoke the base on which that commitment was extracted in Harrisburg. The principal problem that I had with I think if the city could eliminate all cigarette licenses in the city, that would be a positive. The main concern I had as I do with many city tax policies, is its punitive effect on particular people. I view taxes as something that should hit each of us as our dues for being in a civilized society. And the most objectionable part, I thought, of that regulation was that the particular convenience store owners for whom the value of their store is based on the fact that they have cigarette licenses would suddenly see that yanked from them, and their values would go from $450,000 a store to maybe $50,000 or maybe nothing, and that's unconstitutional, right? That you can't take away somebody's hard-earned wealth accumulation just because retroactively you've got a new policy choice. And that ultimately the city would be sued, would be taken through the meat grinder, and would have to pay tens of millions of dollars in damages for something that they thought they were getting for free. You're talking about having some kind of forward-looking risk assessment. If you had 500, imagine you have 500 stores and the city owes $500,000 to each of those people, so that's like $250 million that we'd have to pay out in settlements. How would you like to come to the budget hearing and have to make up $250 million all of a sudden because somebody did a policy decision that was illegal?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O, or Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple more questions for you. The Philadelphia Parking Authority, is the state right now doing an audit of the parking?
Yes.
Do they do that in cooperation with you, or
No.
they do it on their own? Any idea when that audit might be finished?
I think it started in August, so they're 7 months into it. I'm kind of would have thought it would have been completed by now. Certainly, the Auditor General was extremely enthusiastic and optimistic that he was going to have substantial findings. So I am waiting with bated breath.
Okay.
This will be one of the great American masterpieces.
And so, could you maybe explain to me that we have 4 parking garages in the Philadelphia Parking Authority? Are those owned by the city of Philadelphia?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah.
And have we, I don't know if it's your office or who it would be, but is there a way to look into this concept of maybe we don't need to own those 4 garages? Maybe we should hire one of the best architects in the city and design the highest and best use, have it rezoned, and sell it.
Well, this is where there needs to be some direct guidance from the council. We've been around this track before. I know that there are private operators in the city who believe that the garages should be totally automated or reduced.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking
But-
about highest and best use.
But if the council passes a resolution and says, we're on board for that, we'll do it. Auditing is not a well-understood function, but there needs to be a scope of work. There needs to be an agreement by the people that are asking for the audit as to what are we trying to find. And if we can get 9 people on council to say that's what they want, we'll do it.
Because in my opinion, these 4 lots in today's market could be worth $80 to $100 million. And on top of that, I'm sure they'll get an abatement when they build, but we'll get the land value tax coming back. We don't get any taxes right now, I don't think, do we? So we get real estate taxes, we get a big chunk of money, and it's probably be run more efficiently that way. And that's just one piece. There's a lot of other areas in that parking authority that need to be run more efficient. I know a little about it because I'm kind of in the parking business also. But I'm not suggesting we keep these 4 lots as parking lots. What I'm suggesting is we look at these, and we have the power to rezone it in the benefit of the city before we sell it. Don't let the developer come in, rezone it, and make the money on our back. Let us do the rezoning ourselves and then sell it.
But there's so many parts to the whole parking problem. The parking operators have in years past come and shown the city where there's illegal parking lots operating and how they can recover revenues, and have tried to make the case that the parking tax in combination with use and occupancy has completely eliminated the profit margin in parking lots. So the issue is whether a majority of the policymakers can get on the same page in terms of deciding how they want to solve these problems. And we are more than happy to be the instrument, the technical instrument.
I'm on the page right now to sell the 4 lots. Anybody, I'm happy to do that.
All you got to do is get 8 more council people.
Okay.
And we're-
Let me ask you 2 other questions, or one other question, really. In your opinion, the top 3 ways right now for the city of Philadelphia to save money in the short term and long term, what would you say are the 3 best ways for us to save money?
I really don't have a glib response to that. I'd have to reflect on that and give you
Okay,
a
that's fine.
response.
Yeah, just let us know. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Is there any other members have any questions for our city controller for the budget hearing? Mr. Controller, I want to thank you and your team for your testimony and answering all the questions that we had today.